behind you.
There is a concept in psychology and robotics known as the Uncanny Valley. It is a documented biological response. When we see something that looks human, like a highly advanced robot, a mannequin, or a lifelike doll, but its movements or features are just slightly wrong, our brain doesn't register it as interesting. Our brain registers it as a lethal threat. Your heart rate spikes, your skin crawls, you feel a deep primal sense of revulsion and absolute terror. But evolutionary biologists struggle to explain why we have this reaction. Human beings evolved to fear things that can kill us. We have an instinctual fear of spiders, snakes, and the dark, because our ancestors were hunted by predators in the dark. So, if evolution only teaches us to fear things that hunted us, what exactly was hunting our ancestors that looked almost human but wasn't? Welcome to Prince of Darkness. Tonight, we're not looking at internet creepypastas or Hollywood monsters. We're looking at historical, theological, and modern documented proof of the mimic phenomenon. For thousands of years, long before the Navajo spoke of the Skinwalker, the most sacred texts on Earth carried a terrifying warning. A warning that we share this planet with entities that can wear our skin. Lock your doors and pay very close attention to the voices outside your window tonight.
Hey, wait!
Before we open the modern case files, we have to look at the historical precedent. The idea of shape-shifting entities is not a myth born in the American desert. It is a global, theological consensus. In the Islamic faith, the Quran explicitly details the existence of the Jinn. These are not ghosts or demons, but an entirely separate ancient race of beings created from smokeless fire. They live in a parallel dimension to ours, completely invisible to the human eye. But theological scholars and ancient hadiths agree on a terrifying detail. The Jinn have the ability to cross over and manifest in the physical world. They can take the shape of animals, most commonly black dogs or snakes. But more disturbingly, powerful Jinn can shapeshift to look exactly like a human being. They can mimic voices perfectly to lure travelers off the desert paths. Similarly, in ancient Jewish mythology and Kabbalistic texts, we find descriptions of the Shedim. These are spirits that live in the desolate places of the earth, ruins, deserts, and deep forests. Ancient scholars wrote that the Shedim could assume human form to deceive and harm the living. Christian demonology warns of familiar spirits and entities that disguise themselves as angels of light or loved ones to infiltrate human lives. The point is this: the greatest religious and historical texts of human history did not view these entities as fairy tales. They viewed them as physical realities. They wrote rules on how to protect yourself from them. And as the following modern cases prove, these ancient entities never left. They just adapted to the modern world. Our first documented case takes place in the heart of Navajo Nation territory along US 191 in Utah. This is a desolate, pitch-black stretch of highway that cuts through ancient red rock and endless desert. It was November of 2017. Officer Vance, a veteran highway patrolman, was working the graveyard shift. It was 3:15 a.m. The temperature outside had dropped below freezing. Vance hadn't seen another set of headlights for over 2 hours. The only sound was the hum of his cruiser's engine and the static on the radio. He was cruising at exactly 65 miles per hour, his high beams cutting through the absolute darkness of the desert. Out of the corner of his eye, Vance saw movement on the right shoulder of the highway. At first, his brain registered it as a large animal, a deer or an elk getting ready to dart across the road. He instinctively took his foot off the gas and rested it on the brake. But as the headlights illuminated the shoulder, his mind went blank. It wasn't an animal. It was a person, a naked, impossibly pale man running completely parallel to the police cruiser. Vance glanced down at his speedometer. He was going 60 miles per hour. Human beings, even Olympic sprinters, max out at around 27 miles per hour for a few seconds. The figure outside Vance's window was maintaining a speed of 60 miles per hour, and it wasn't even struggling. Vance's heart hammered against his ribs. The Uncanny Valley effect hit him like a physical blow. The thing outside Vance's window looked human, but its biomechanics were completely, horrifyingly wrong. Its arms were swinging wildly, its strides were massive, almost leaping across the desert brush. Vance hit the brakes, intending to slide behind the figure and shine his spotlight on it. The moment the cruiser began to slow down, the entity reacted. It snapped its head toward the police car. Vance couldn't make out its facial features in the harsh light, but he saw its eyes. They didn't reflect light like a human's. They glowed with a self-illuminating, dull amber light. And then, the entity did something that haunts Officer Vance to this day. While running at 50 miles per hour, it dropped from 2 legs down to all 4s. Its spine cracked and elongated, its limbs twisted with a sickening, popping sound that Vance could hear through the closed windows. It didn't break stride. It hit the dirt on all 4s, its body instantly morphing into the shape of a massive, grotesquely oversized canine. In the blink of an eye, the creature veered off the shoulder and bolted into the pitch-black desert, moving so fast it vanished from the headlights in less than 3 seconds. Vance slammed on the brakes, his cruiser skidding to a halt in the middle of the empty highway. He sat there, his hand resting on his service weapon, hyperventilating. He didn't use the radio, he didn't call it in. Because what exactly do you tell dispatch? That you just saw an ancient demon break the laws of physics on Route 191. Officer Vance transferred out of the night shift the following week. He refuses to drive that stretch of highway even in broad daylight. He knows what the ancient texts warned about. He knows they are still out there, running in the dark. Physical shape-shifting is terrifying, but according to ancient lore, the most dangerous weapon a Skinwalker or a Jinn possesses is not its claws, it is its voice. They are apex mimics, like a parrot repeating a phrase. They can record and perfectly replicate the sound of a crying baby, an injured woman, or worse, the voice of someone you love. This brings us to a highly classified incident report filed in the Pacific Northwest in the winter of 2021. A wildlife photographer named Arthur rented an isolated off-grid cabin deep in the Cascade Mountains to photograph winter predators. The nearest paved road was 40 miles away. The nearest town was 2 hours. He was completely alone. On his 3rd night, a massive blizzard hit the region, dumping 3 feet of snow and cutting off the cabin's satellite internet. Arthur was trapped, but he had firewood, a generator, and supplies. He went to sleep listening to the howling wind. At 2:45 a.m., Arthur woke up. The wind had died down. The cabin was dead silent. But that wasn't what woke him. He heard a tapping sound coming from the thick wooden front door. Tap, tap, tap. Arthur froze in his bed. He was 40 miles deep into a frozen wilderness. No hiker or lost tourist could survive out there in a blizzard. He quietly slipped out of bed, grabbed his heavy flashlight, and crept toward the front room. As he stood a few feet from the heavy oak door, a voice spoke from the other side. "Arthur, please open the door. I'm so cold." Arthur's heart completely stopped. The flashlight nearly slipped from his sweaty grip. It was his wife's voice, the exact pitch, the exact cadence. but his wife was in an apartment in Chicago, 2,000 miles away. "Arthur, please," the voice begged. "My hands are freezing. Let me in." The psychological torture of that moment is unimaginable. Every instinct in Arthur's brain screamed at him to open the door, to save his wife. But logic, cold and terrifying, anchored him to the floorboards. It was physically impossible for her to be on the other side of that wood. Arthur didn't make a sound. He didn't turn on a light. Then the voice changed. It didn't sound like his wife crying anymore. The tone shifted, becoming flat, mechanical, and completely devoid of emotion. And it began to repeat the exact same phrase over and over, with the exact same spacing, like a broken audio file.
"Arthur, please open the door. I'm so cold. Arthur, please open the door. I'm so cold."
It looped perfectly, no breaths taken between the sentences. Arthur backed away slowly, retreating into the hallway, and as he did, the floorboard beneath his foot let out a loud, sharp creak. The voice outside instantly stopped. Total silence fell over the cabin. 10 agonizing seconds passed. Then, from the other side of the door, Arthur heard a new voice. It was deep, it was heavy, and it was his own voice. The entity outside was perfectly mimicking the sound of Arthur's own terrified breathing. Then, in Arthur's exact voice, the thing outside whispered, "I know you're standing right there." Suddenly, something massive slammed into the solid oak door. The entire cabin shook. The heavy deadbolt groaned under the impact. It slammed again and again. The force was like a car hitting the wood. Arthur retreated to the bathroom, locked the flimsy interior door, and sat in the bathtub with a hunting knife until the sun finally came up. When he finally gathered the courage to open the front door at noon, there were no human footprints in the snow, just massive, unidentifiable tracks perfectly circling the cabin before trailing off back into the dark tree line. Our final case dives directly into the Uncanny Valley. It is one thing to hear a mimic from behind a locked door. It is an entirely different nightmare to let one inside. This account comes from two brothers, Elias and Thomas, who were hunting on private, heavily wooded property in the Appalachian foothills of Pennsylvania. They were staying in a small one-room hunting shack with a single battery-powered lantern for light. It was their second night. At around 9 p.m., Thomas realized he had left his heavy hunting knife in the bed of his pickup truck, which was parked about 200 yards down the dirt path. He grabbed a small flashlight and told Elias he would be right back. Elias sat in the shack, cleaning his rifle by the dim light of the lantern. About 5 minutes later, the front door unlatched and swung open. Thomas stepped inside, closing the door behind him. He walked over to his cot in the corner of the room and sat down, his back turned to Elias. "Did you find it?" Elias asked, not looking up from his rifle. Thomas didn't answer. He just sat on the edge of the cot, perfectly still. Elias felt a sudden, inexplicable drop in the room's temperature. The air felt heavy, suffocating. He looked up at his brother. The lantern light cast long shadows, but as Elias stared at his brother's back, his brain began firing alarm signals. Something was wrong. Thomas was wearing his red flannel jacket, but it looked incredibly tight, as if the shoulders beneath the fabric had suddenly grown 2 inches wider. His posture was rigid, unnaturally stiff. "Tom?" Elias asked, his voice wavering slightly. "You good, man?" Slowly, the figure on the cot turned its head. It looked exactly like Thomas, the hair, the beard, the shape of the jaw. But as Elias looked into his brother's face, the Uncanny Valley effect gripped him by the throat. The skin on Thomas's face looked like it was pulled too tightly over his skull. It looked like a mask that didn't quite fit. But the most terrifying detail was his eyes. They were wide open, too wide. He wasn't blinking. And then the figure smiled. It wasn't a human smile. The corners of its mouth stretched too far up the sides of its cheeks, revealing too many teeth. "I found it," the thing that looked like Thomas said. The voice was Thomas's, but it was coming out of the mouth incorrectly. The lips weren't moving in sync with the words, like a badly dubbed movie. Elias slowly slid his hand down the barrel of his rifle, reaching for a loaded magazine on the table. The creature's terrifying, unblinking eyes locked onto Elias's hand. Its smile grew wider. Its jaw unhinged slightly with a wet, cracking sound. It leaned forward, preparing to lunge across the small room. Suddenly, the static on Elias's walkie-talkie broke the silence. The radio crackled on the table, and from the speaker, Elias heard his brother's voice. "Hey, Eli," the real Thomas said over the radio, his voice echoing in the small shack. "The truck battery's dead. I'm walking back now. Have the coffee ready." Elias stared at the radio. Then he looked back up at the cot. The thing wearing his brother's face stopped smiling. It slowly stood up. It didn't stand up like a human. It unfolded itself, its limbs extending just a fraction too long, its head nearly brushing the ceiling of the shack. It stared down at Elias with absolute malice. Then it opened its mouth and perfectly mimicked the sound of the radio static. Before Elias could raise his rifle, the lantern suddenly flickered and died, plunging the shack into absolute pitch darkness. In the absolute pitch black of the shack, Elias didn't hesitate. Survival instinct took over completely. He didn't aim, he just raised the rifle in the direction of the cot and pulled the trigger. The deafening roar of the gunshot shattered the silence, the muzzle flash brilliantly illuminating the small room for a fraction of a second. In that split second of light, Elias saw it. The thing wasn't on the cot anymore. It was directly above him, crawling on the ceiling like a massive, disjointed insect, its elongated limbs pressed against the wooden beams. Elias fired a second round into the dark, scrambling backward until his back hit the wall. Suddenly, the front door was kicked open. A bright white light cut through the gun smoke. It was the real Thomas, holding a heavy maglite and panting heavily, having heard the gunshots. "Eli, are you okay?" Thomas yelled, sweeping the light across the room. Elias was sitting on the floor, his rifle raised, hyperventilating. The room was completely empty. But on the far side of the room, the heavy iron-barred window had been completely ripped out of the wooden frame. The solid metal bars were bent outward, warped by an unimaginable physical force. Whatever had been wearing Thomas's face didn't open the door. It tore its way through solid wood and iron to escape into the dark woods. The brothers didn't stay the night. They abandoned their gear, got in the truck, and drove until the sun came up. We live in an age of science and reason. We like to believe that we have categorized every living creature on this planet. When we read the ancient texts, the warnings of the Jinn, the Shedim, and the Skinwalkers, we dismiss them as the superstitions of a primitive world. But evolutionary biology does not lie. The Uncanny Valley is not a glitch in our psychology. It is an alarm bell. It is a biological survival mechanism hardwired into our DNA by ancestors who learned the hard way that not everything that looks human is human. These entities didn't disappear just because we stopped believing in them. They just retreated to the deep deserts, the dense forests, and the isolated highways. They are still out there, watching, listening, and learning how to mimic our voices. If these true accounts made you reconsider your next camping trip, hit that like button right now. It feeds the algorithm and proves that the Prince of Darkness's army is growing. Subscribe and turn on all notifications if you want to explore the darkest, classified corners of our world. Now I want to hear from you. Head down to the comments and tell me, have you ever heard your name being called when you knew you were completely alone? Let me know. I read every comment. Until next time, trust your instincts. If something looks almost human, but your skin crawls, run. And whatever you do, don't open the door. Good night.